Hello, I'm Richard Toye, and in this episode of Talking Churchill, I'm going to be playing host because I'm going to be interviewing Warren Dockter about his exciting new book, which has just been published, which is called Winston Churchill at the Telegraph.
Thank you very much, Richard. It is a delight to be the interviewee on Talking Churchill.
So this is a collection of articles written by and about Churchill, published in the Daily Telegraph. So if you could, just for the benefit of our listeners who may not be familiar with the story, Warren, can you tell us how Churchill's connection with the Telegraph originated?
Churchill's relationship with the Telegraph began when he was a junior officer on the northwest frontier in India. He was also a war correspondent for the Telegraph, and he wrote about his experiences in the Malacan Valley, and this sort of later formed the foundation of his very first book, the Malacan Field Force. So Churchill had a very early relationship with the Telegraph all the way from 1897. And Churchill wrote for the Telegraph off and on, sometimes writing in applauding their change of font, sometimes writing in, as he did in the late 50s, because they had reported that one of his horses was a foal when it wasn't. And Churchill, of course, even wrote into them congratulating them on their centenary in 1955 and referred to himself as the oldest member of the Telegraph. So Churchill had a very long relationship with the Telegraph over the years, and it published many of his articles, and they had a very good relationship. Of course, also, he had a very positive relationship with the Telegraph editor, Lord Camrose.
So this really is a remarkable treasure trove of articles. What's your favourite article in the book, Warren, and why?
There are a couple of very interesting collections, I think, in this book. One of the collections is Churchill's view of the Navy in the First World War, which is a collection of articles that I don't believe has been published anywhere else but in here, since they were originally published in the Telegraph so many years ago. And then there's, I guess, probably my favorite collection is called Churchill's Postscript, which serves as Churchill's sort of postscript to his memoirs of the Second World War, and takes into account the sort of, the advances in technology, his sort of understanding of nuclear warfare and so forth, and how he thinks that ultimately humanity will sort of continue its march forward. But as far as single articles, my most favorite article is definitely one that the Telegraph ran, which is called Mr. Stalin Attacks Churchill. And this was given in the wake of Churchill's Iron Curtain speech, or the Sinews of Peace speech, in 1946. And you can tell here that Stalin takes a very harsh line with Churchill, as you could is sort of understandable. And Stalin remarks that the Nazis had tried to use a sort of racial ideology to push forward their dominance of Europe, and Stalin cast Churchill's speech as a way of using sort of Anglo-American or the English language as their sort of rationale for a new empire. And it's very clear that as a result of the Sinews of Peace speech, as well as Stalin's reaction to it, that you can see the historical gears in motion that would ultimately lead to a massive Cold War that, of course, we're still living with the legacy of today. So it's just a tremendously powerful article to see into the workings, I guess, of Stalin's mind.
So the Telegraph was actually particularly important to Churchill in the 1930s, wasn't it? Because it was one of the few papers that really supported him in his campaign against appeasement at a time when Neville Chamberlain's government was actually sort of strongly attempting to control the press and to suppress dissent.
Yes, that is a very interesting point, Richard. Churchill's relationship in the 1930s with the Telegraph took on a new dimension. And there's some very interesting archival evidence in the Churchill archives where you can see an exchange between Lord Camrose and Winston Churchill. And Lord Camrose received a telegram from Churchill explaining that his articles in the Evening Standard were discontinued because they believed that he was too incendiary and they believed that he was a bit of a warmonger. And this is, of course, and they tended to be more in line with the conservative government of Neville Chamberlain. Whereas Lord Camrose said that he was happy to take on um, Churchill's articles, and so that he could publish them fortnightly in the Telegraph. And this happened, of course, in the 1940s. And it's in the sort of 1930s that Churchill publishes huge amounts of stuff about the coming war in Europe, his sort of understanding of foreign relations at the time. So he talks about, Mussolini invading sort of Ethiopia and Eritrea. He talks about trying to keep Turkey neutral, places that you wouldn't necessarily think of immediately. Churchill covers in a vast array of his articles for the Telegraph during the 1930s. So it's a very interesting time for Churchill in the Telegraph. And I try to bring that out in the book as much as possible.
I'm particularly intrigued by chapter 12 in the book, which is headlined Churchill's Pets. Can you tell us more about that?
I'm very pleased that you asked about chapter 12. It was a bit of a pet project of mine. Um, the point of the book, of course, is to look at the relationship between the Telegraph and Churchill, how the Telegraph reported on Churchill, and what Churchill wrote for the Telegraph. But it goes through his whole life, so I didn't want to just look at the war years, and I didn't just want to have examples from, the Cold War or something. I wanted to have a full breadth and range of Churchill. And one of the most important aspects of Churchill's personality is the fact that he was a certified animal lover. And I try to bring this out in the fact that the Telegraph reported on Churchill's pets. And I mean, some of his pets, I'm using the word pet in the sort of broadest sense, because some of them, of course, like the lion Rhoda, he didn't keep at Chartwell, unlike his dog Rufus the second, who, of course, stayed at Chartwell, and his numerous cats, one of which was called Jock after his private secretary, Jock Colville. And, in fact, currently at Chartwell today, there is still a Jock in residence, which is an orange marmalade cat, and I think it's Jock the Sixth now. So my point in this is that it's one of those elements of Churchill's personality that's often overlooked because there's so much stuff that happened in Churchill's life. But it's important to remember that as a person, he had a great love of animals. And you can see this in the very fact that the Telegraph would report on his animals and his pets. So if a black swan of his went missing, such as it did, the Telegraph ran a story about it. And when the swan was found in Europe, having lost its way in some sort of a storm, it was returned to Churchill in part with the help of the Telegraph. So I do think that you see not only Churchill's relationship with the Telegraph coming out as a result of the sort of reporting on his pets, but also you get this real sense that he loved animals, and I think that's very important.
Okay, thanks, Warren. And to the listeners out there and the viewers, please do join us again for another episode of Talking Churchill.